Welcome to URL Unzip, Reboot, and Leave, a podcast about the psychology that moves us. Through real conversations with thinkers, doers, and seekers, we explore how we adapt, evolve, and find meaning. So let's unzip, reboot, and leave. Today, it is my honor and privilege to speak with Professor Sam Vaknin, a renowned public intellectual. He is the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited, and many other books. He is a professor of psychology at Commonwealth Institute for Advanced Professional Studies, Cambridge, columnist with Brussels Morning Newspaper, and economic advisor to governments and multinational corporations. He is one of the most recognized global voices on narcissism and psychology, as his YouTube channel has reached over 90 million views and more than 410,000 subscriptions. Today, we will discuss the psychology of narcissists, where he explains abuse, heartbreak, violence, and healing. Please welcome Professor Sam Vaknin. So the first question is, there are many individuals I know they are not aware of these narcissists and psychopaths. Can you please give a clear distinction of these two things and what percentage of population are like that in the world?
As far as first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you. As far as we know, about 1.7% of the general population suffer from narcissistic personality disorder. And about 1% of the general population are psychopaths, people with antisocial personality disorder and the extreme variants of antisocial personality disorder, colloquially known as psychopathy. So these are small numbers. We are talking about a total of 2.5% of the general population. And that means that you are very unlikely to have come across one. Despite what all the self-styled experts are saying online, so-called experts, yes, are saying online, pathological narcissism is extremely rare, and psychopathy is even more rare. The difference between the narcissist and the psychopath, the differences are numerous. First of all, the psychopath is not dependent on other people for the regulation of the psychopath psychology. So the psychopath self-regulates. Very similar to a healthy person. Healthy people self-regulate. Whereas a narcissist relies on other people in order to regulate his emotions, affects, his cognitions, his sense of self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence. So the narcissist is essentially a type of codependent. He depends on other people for what we call external regulation, whereas a psychopath doesn't. Second difference is that the narcissist is focused on obtaining attention. Attention could be negative, attention could be positive. This is known as narcissistic supply. And the narcissist uses the attention to self-enhance. In other words, to buttress, to support, to uphold a grandiose, fantastic, unrealistic self-image, what we call self-concept. Whereas a psychopath doesn't. The psychopath doesn't need any external input or feedback in order to regulate his or her sense of self-worth, for example. The third difference is that whereas narcissists are exclusively focused on narcissistic supply, on obtaining attention, securing adoration and adulation and attention, and maybe being feared, but in any case being noticed, being noted. The psychopath is goal-oriented. The psychopath is after sex, he wants money, he wants access, he wants power, whereas the narcissist couldn't care less about any of these things. The narcissist would like to have money because money brings attention. The narcissist would like to be in power because being in power brings attention. But the focus is on attention. And there are many others, but the last important difference is that psychopaths are able to tell the difference between reality and fantasy. They have what we call reality testing, an intact reality testing. Whereas narcissists are incapable of telling the difference between their fantasies and delusions and reality. So they are a bit psychotic. They are delusional. They're no longer with us. They're not grounded in reality. And that is definitely not the case with the psychopath. However, there are many commonalities between the two types. For example, both of them have what we call cold empathy, cognitive and reflexive empathy, the ability to decode and decipher other people, and then take advantage of this information, of these vulnerabilities and weaknesses of other people. So this is common to both of them. Both of them display what we call dissociality. It's a trait. Both of them are a bit antisocial. The psychopath is defiant. The psychopath is contumacious. He rejects authority. The psychopath is reckless. Whereas the narcissist simply breaks the law from time to time. He's so self-centered that he doesn't care much about society, social edicts, mores, conventions, norms, and so on. But these are both antisocial types. And there's also the question of aggression, whereas a psychopath would tend to externalize aggression. The psychopath would be ostentatiously and visibly aggressive, verbally and very often physically. The narcissist would tend to be aggressive if it's an overt narcissist. The overt narcissist would tend to be aggressive the same way the psychopath is, but the aggression in the case of narcissism would be laced with contempt. It would be contemptuous aggression. And the covert narcissists, the vulnerable narcissist, as it is mistakenly called, is likely to be passive aggressive. So this is in a nutshell. These are the differences and the commonalities in a nutshell.
So that means sounds like psychopaths are much more, they're the high school kids. Narcissists are like primary school kids, basically.
Yes,
Spectrum.
You're very right, actually. I think that psychopaths are much more mentally healthy than narcissists. Psychopaths are much more adults than narcissists. I think psychopathy is actually not a mental illness at all. I think it's a societal problem. It's someone whose lifestyle, whose choices, whose beliefs do not sit well with society, do not conform to societal expectations and mores and law and the law and so on. It's someone who is a law unto himself, someone who is aggressive, but that's a personality style. That's a character. That's not a mental illness. That's not a personality disorder. I think this should be eliminated from the DSM. I think it's a mistake. I don't think it's a mental illness. Whereas
Wow.
narcissism is a severe mental illness. Otto Kernberg, who is the father of the field, still alive, by the way. Otto Kernberg suggested that narcissistic personality disorders and borderline personality organization are basically one and the same to a large extent. And they're both pre-psychotic or pseudo-psychotic. They're almost psychotic. So the narcissist cannot tell the difference between reality and fantasy. The narcissist cannot tell the difference between external objects, people out there, and their representations in his mind. So he confuses internal objects with external objects, which is exactly what the psychotic person does. So it's a form of pseudopsychosis. It's very serious. I would say that narcissistic disorders, including borderline personality disorder, are second only to schizophrenia. They're almost as bad as schizophrenia, whereas a psychopath is someone who is perfectly functional, someone who is mature, someone who has a coherent, cohesive self, whereas a narcissist doesn't have a self. Ironically, the narcissist is selfless because his ego, if you wish, his self has been disrupted. The formation of the self has been disrupted. The psychopath has a self. The psychopath functions well in society, is goal-oriented, highly accomplished, and high-functioning. Most psychopaths, not all of them, of course, but the majority of psychopaths. And the psychopath simply couldn't care less about morality. He has no conscience and no empathy. So it's a social problem. The psychopath is a social problem, very similar to the criminal. Now imagine that we were to say all criminals are mentally ill. Everyone would laugh. This is obviously a risible, idiotic statement. It's nonsense. Of course, not all criminals are mentally ill. But when we say psychopaths are mentally ill, For some reason, it's accepted simply because they reject society as an arbiter, or society as a regulator, or society as a decision maker. They are lone wolves. They don't believe in integrating in society, interacting with other people. They believe other people are instruments or at best collaborators. And they don't accept the exigencies and impositions of an external law. But all psychopaths have their own behavioral code and their own laws, internalized law. And all psychopaths would tell you, I have my own law, I obey it, I follow it, I have my own conscience, and I have my own form of justice, which I impose on others and on myself. So I think we should make a clear distinction between psychopaths, who are simply people who have rejected society, and narcissists who are mentally ill. It's a clear distinction here.
It basically sounded like, they are highly disagreeable personality and very borderline they can tweak into that criminality thing easily, these psychopaths. But narcissists are more, oh, wow. Okay. So is it by birth? I mean, you mentioned about the societal thing for psychopaths, but is it from birth or is it from some abuse during that, like a nascent stage? How does it happen?
Yes, the formative years.
Yeah.
Psychopathy has a strong hereditary component. So we believe that the state of psychopathy, which doesn't have to be mental illness, it's a behavioral state. Yeah? It's a confluence, a combination of traits and behaviors, but it doesn't amount to mental illness in my view. However, these traits are hereditary and they bring on the behaviors. So we have, for example, in psychopathy, we have antagonism. We have dissociality, the rejection of society. These are all traits, and they're all hereditary. We have negative affectivity. These are all traits. So these traits are hereditary, and we're inclined to believe that psychopathy and borderline personality disorder, which often segues into psychopathy, these two seem to be genetically, to some extent, genetically determined. No one is quite sure what is the contribution of genetics. No one is quite sure. When it comes to narcissism, it's a more complicated picture. Regrettably, at this stage, we have no rigorous, serious, longitudinal, randomized, controlled studies that would demonstrate ineluctably and indisputably that there is a genetic component in narcissism. We don't have such studies. However, it stands to reason that pathological narcissism is to some extent genetically determined, because narcissism, borderline, psychopathy, they're all members of the same family, a family known as cluster B personality disorders. So if two of the relatives, psychopaths and borderlines, have a strong genetic component, it stands to reason that the third relative, narcissism, would have a strong genetic component. And we have some indications in twin studies that there is some genetic contribution in the case of narcissism. However, there's no dispute that even if there is a genetic determinant, even if there is a hereditary contribution or predisposition, there's no debate that it does not express, it does not manifest, unless there is also a specific childhood environment. In other words, we know, for example, that every human being on Earth, that includes the two of us, have a trait called narcissism. All human beings, no exception. And we do know that this trait is hereditary. Narcissism is very healthy. Narcissism underlies our ability to regulate our self-concept, self-confidence, self-esteem, and sense of self-worth. Narcissism is critical in the internal regulatory system. So it's very good and very healthy. It's good we all have narcissism. And it's definitely genetic and hereditary. But how does it become malignant? How does it become pathological? At this stage, there's no dispute that it is a result of a specific environment, childhood environment. There's no debate about this. There are a few fringe figures and outliers that claim otherwise, but that's absolutely the majority of scholars agree. And so what is this environment? People think that this environment must include classical forms of abuse, like verbal abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse. That is partly true. Whenever the child is not allowed to separate from the parent, whenever the child's nascent boundaries, emerging boundaries are denied, whenever the child is penalized for expressing itself from becoming, whenever the child is not allowed to develop a self, an ego, if you wish, call it whatever you want, a core identity, a kernel, whenever the child, in other words, is not allowed to separate, individuate, that's the clinical term, this, on rare occasions, gives rise to pathological narcissism. As I said in response to your first question, it's rare, but such childhood environment is a precondition for the emergence of pathological narcissism. Now, what am I talking about? There are many ways to breach the child's emerging boundaries. There are many ways to prevent the child from becoming a separate individual, separate entity. There are many ways. So one way, of course, is sexual abuse. You're breaching the child's bodily boundaries, definitely. Another way is physical abuse, same. Verbal abuse, psychological abuse. These are the classical forms. But also, if you pedestalize the child, if you idolize the child, if you tell the child that he can do no wrong, if, in other words, you're preventing the child from interacting with reality, you're preventing the friction with reality, which is the great teacher. Reality is a great teacher. So you're not allowing the child to mature, to grow up, to develop, to become an adult. That's an example of abuse. If you instrumentalize the child, if you use the child for some goal or some gratification, for example, if you as a parent use the child to realize your own unfulfilled dreams, you wanted to be a pianist or an actress and you failed, and now your child will be the actress. Your child will be the pianist. You are a medical doctor, so your child will also be a medical doctor. When the child becomes an extension, an instrument, that's abuse. When you parentify the child, when the child becomes your own mother or father, you are childish, you are selfish, you are narcissistic, you are self-centered, you are emotionally absent, you are depressed, and then the child becomes your caretaker, your caregiver, The child is the parent. That's parentification. That's abuse. When you're overprotective, you don't allow the child to interact with other peers, to go out on the street and so on, because you're terrified, you're insecure. That's abuse. You're not allowing the child to flourish and to become, especially via interactions with peers. So there are many ways to abuse and traumatize the child, many, many. And all of them lead, in 1.7% of the cases, to the formation of a narcissist, or the emergence of a narcissist. Now, is this somehow genetically or hereditarily determined? What I'm saying is that even if there is a genetic component, it's only a predisposition. It's a template. It's a fertile ground. But it takes an abusive, wrong, bad parenting to create a narcissist, even when the predisposition exists.
Jesus, you changed the understanding of the word abuse. My goodness. Okay, now so these narcissistic people, they will become teen and adolescents and all these things. So we will try to understand how they interacting with others and what their red flag, how they can get it like, okay, something is not right. So first, how do narcissists show up in teenage relationship, like friendship, dating, even within the families, for say?
They don't. we cannot diagnose pathological narcissism prior to age 21, and many scholars say that we cannot diagnose it prior to age 25.
Okay.
There
Wow.
has been there's been a redefinition of what we call adolescence, and now we regard people under the age of 21 to be adolescent. You have studies by Twenge, Campbell, many others, which the viewers can go into if they want to learn more. But there are two periods in human life, in human development, in the lifespan. There are two periods where overt, grandiose narcissism is healthy and recommended. And that is early childhood between the ages of 18 and 36 months, and teenage years, adolescence. In other words, in these two periods in life, you need to be an overt, grandiose, selfish, defiant, even contumacious narcissist, a bit antisocial. You need to be, because it's healthy. It's healthy to be like that. And I will go a bit and elaborate a bit on this. As a child, you're 18 months old. You're 18 months old. You're attached to mommy. Mommy is the world. You know nothing but mommy. Mommy feeds you, mommy shelters you, mommy changes your diapers if you're still in diapers. Mommy is there for you. She provides what we call object constancy, a sense of safety and stability. This is known as a secure base function of motherhood. And so mommy is it. Mommy is the universe. And then, starting at age 18 months, you feel the urge to let go of mommy and begin to explore the world. Walk a few steps and run back to mommy. And then walk a few more steps, few additional steps, and run back to mommy. This is known as separation, rapprochement. So, to let go of mommy, you need to be seriously grandiose.
Mhm. Mhm.
You need to feel that you have godlike powers, that you can take on the world without mommy.
Wow.
You need to be a narcissist to let go of mother when you are, which is the only protection you have, the only reality you have, the only source of sustenance and subsistence, the only guarantee for your continued survival. To let go of this and to walk away and explore the world and discover other people, you need to be fantastically grandiose. In other words, you need to be a narcissist. So narcissism is very healthy at this stage, at this phase in human development, because it allows you to explore the world, to discover the world. When you're a teenager, you need to reject your parents. You need to reject your parents. You need to define yourself. You need to form opinions. You need to explore various identities, including various sexual orientations and other types of identities and so on. And you're doing all this on your own. You're the sole judge and the sole arbiter and the sole decision maker throughout this process, because you reject the authority of others. You reject the wisdom of others. Rejecting others is a critical part of healthy adolescence. Adolescence is about a second separation. Adolescence is a reenactment of separation, individuation in early childhood. It's a replay. But in order to reject all other people, you're rejecting your parents, you're rejecting teachers, you're rejecting the authorities, you're rejecting sometimes your peers. In order to reject all these people and to convince yourself, believe that you are the greatest possible authority on everything, and you can form opinions, you can make judgments, you can shapeshift, you can mold yourself and sculpt yourself. You need to be seriously deluded and grandiose. That's why we do not diagnose a pathological narcissism in adolescence, because what is called pathological narcissism starts only in adulthood. If, as an adult, you are fixated at this stage. So Freud makes a distinction between primary narcissism, which is essentially healthy, and secondary narcissism. Secondary narcissism is when primary narcissism continues into adulthood. So you have an adolescent mindset as an adult. You refuse to grow up. You refuse to make commitments and investments. You feel entitled without any commensurate effort. You have a view of the world which is black and white, splitting. It's called a splitting defense. All these are puerile. They're immature. If this persists into adulthood, or then and only then, I can call you a narcissist. But only then.
So now they are into adulthood and the romantic, which is a complicated one sector, and another is professional relationship. Okay, how they behave and how we distinguish as a normal human being between this strong confidence and this narcissistic behavior.
First of all, narcissists make no distinction between romantic, intimate relationships and professional, career, interpersonal relationships. They don't make any distinction because essentially they're incapable of intimacy and love. They have no access to positive emotions. As far as they're concerned, any interaction with another person is identical to any other interaction with any other person. So a colleague at work and your wife as a narcissist, you would interact with them identically. You would use the same scheme, the same template to interact with both of them. And this template is known as the shared fantasy. You would create a narrative. The narrative would be self-aggrandizing, self-enhancing, and you would expect people to fit into the narrative, to participate in it, and to affirm, to confirm that the narrative, the shared fantasy, is not a fantasy, but is real, is a reality. And you would have this expectation from your wife, from your children, from your pastor or guru, from your co-workers, from your boss, and from the government and institutions. Narcissists interact the same way with all others, other human beings, also because they cannot tell the difference between external objects and internal objects. They don't experience the separateness and externality of other people. As far as they're concerned, as far as narcissists are concerned, they're interacting with a playground of internal objects. Each internal object represents a person, stands in for a person. It's a placeholder or a snapshot, as I call it in my work. Okay, so that's a general introduction. What's the difference between self-confidence and pathological narcissism, or grandiosity, more precisely? Grandiosity is a cognitive distortion. In other words, grandiosity is the inability to perceive reality appropriately. And when reality intrudes or presents itself, the reframing and rewriting of reality, the falsifying of reality. So this is grandiosity. It's a filter, kind of membrane, through which a narcissist apprehends reality through a glass darkly. Self-confidence is grounded in reality. It's a main indicator of mental health. If you have self-confidence and a robust sense of self-esteem, it's usually grounded in reality. You know what you're good at. You know your accomplishments. You own your accomplishments. And you're proud of these things, justly so. So that's the first distinction. Whereas pathological, narcissistic, ostentatious, in-your-face self-confidence and self-esteem is not grounded in reality. It's an outcome of fantasy. And consequently, it's very fragile, very brittle. Real self-confidence is grounded in reality. Number two, when you challenge the narcissist, they react with rage and aggression. Their self-confidence, ostentatious and conspicuous as it is very brittle, it's very fragile. And so any threat to it is perceived as existential threat. And they react with enormous aggression. A really self-confident person, if you challenge them, and they're not narcissists, they're just self-confident, they're not likely to react this way. They don't react with rage and aggression. And
so there is no hierarchy of threats basically to them. It's all same.
You mean narcissism?
Yeah. Two narcissists, there is
Mhm.
no hierarchy of traits. They are all similar, same level
When
of
I
traits
say,
or
when
the
I use
same.
the word narcissist in the context of this discussion, I'm referring exclusively to people diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder.
Yes.
However, there are many other people, and these people have what we call a narcissistic style. Narcissistic style is when you are not so empathic, when you're obnoxious, when you're exploitative, when you're a bit abusive, and so on. So this is a style. And so we do distinguish between gradations of narcissism. We do make this distinction, especially in the International Classification of Diseases, which is a diagnostic manual which is used by 80% of humanity. So in the 11th edition of the ICD, this diagnostic manual, we make a distinction between three layers or three gradations of narcissism on a spectrum. However, only people diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, according to the DSM, which is the other diagnostic manual, only such people can be called narcissists. The others are jerks or a-holes, or but they are not narcissists.
Right.
So this is a disambiguation of the clinical terms that I'm using. Narcissism, pathological narcissism, is very defensive. It's defensive because the fantasy, the core, the self-concept is divorced from reality, is easily undermined and challenged because it's nonsensical, it's inane, it's stupid. The narcissist is protecting this narrative. And consequently, whenever you challenge the narrative, whenever you doubt it, whenever you question, even innocuously, you're not hostile, you're just asking something. Like, take two people, two of them are clinical psychologists. Example, okay? Two of them are clinical psychologists. One of them is a narcissist, and one of them is not. Okay? Both of them are highly self-confident. And then you ask, uh, where do you teach? Where is your professorship? The narcissist is likely to explode, become enraged and aggressive. Like, what? You are doubting me? You are challenging me? You are implying that I'm not a professor? That would be the reaction of the narcissist. The other guy, the clinical psychologist, who is highly self-confident, would tell you, I'm teaching in the Commonwealth Institute in Cambridge, United Kingdom. He wouldn't regard your question as some kind of wicked suspicion or wicked doubting or attempt to undermine his status or whatever. So this is called reactance. This reactivity is very indicative of narcissism, and never appears with someone whose self-confidence is grounded and justified, and so on. So if you want, cut a long story short, it's already late to do that, but I'll try. To cut a long story short, if you want to ascertain whether someone is a narcissist or not, ask him a question. Ask him a question about the narrative, about the self-concept, about the fantasy, or about the story that he's telling about himself. And if he answers the question normally, and he doesn't regard it as any slight or any insult, then it's a healthy person. But if he explodes on you, he wants to bite your head off or whatever, that would be a narcissist.
So this can happen on the first interaction or the second interaction, or how long it takes, or
Forever.
okay. And if the person, like if I'm dealing with them, and if I built emotional resilience within me for whatever reason, will that help? Or still, like, they can manipulate and they can help for us, I mean, for me.
There are two typical reactions of people who are exposed to narcissists. But before I come to that, I want to make clear what this exposure does.
Yes.
Studies in Harvard have shown that people are able to spot narcissists and react to them within 3 seconds. Other studies, many other studies, not one, have demonstrated that people identify narcissists correctly. Narcissists, people diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, People identify them correctly based on a 30-second video or an email. People diagnose other people correctly as narcissists between 75 and 90% of the time based on a video whose length is 30 seconds. We have a very powerful reaction to narcissists as human beings. And this reaction even has a name. It's the uncanny valley reaction. And it immediately creates an innate sense of discomfort. Something's wrong, something is off key, something is half-baked. And then people who are exposed to narcissists choose one of three solutions. Solution number one, they idealize the narcissist. They disconnect from the real narcissist, and they create in their own minds a representation of the narcissist that is elevated, ideal, perfect, amazing, fascinating, incredible, unprecedented, unique, drop-dead gorgeous, brilliant, genius, whatever. They rewrite the narcissist. And from that moment on, they're no longer interacting with the real narcissist. They're interacting with the representation. These people are actually narcissistic themselves, because this is what narcissists do. So this is one possible reaction. Second possible reaction, people become desensitized. Being exposed to the narcissist on a lengthy basis, long-term basis, time and again, creates desensitization. There's a lot of resentment. There's a lot of disappointment. There's a lot of pain and hurt. All this is true, but they detach. They disconnect from the narcissist. They're no longer reactive to the narcissist. They go cold. They go gray. It's called gray rock. They simply freeze. It's a kind of freeze reaction. They deanimate themselves. They die. They die internally and externally. So the narcissist has a mortifying effect on people. He kills them, in effect, mentally. So that's the second solution. And the third solution, which is by far the most common, is when people become narcissists themselves, attempting to counter the narcissist's aggression, unmitigated abuse, constant haranguing and harassing, and in an attempt to survive in this environment, they begin to adopt narcissistic behaviors and traits. So they become aggressive or counter-aggressive. This is called reactive abuse. Their empathy levels decline precipitously. They become less empathic. They become defiant. So gradually, they get infected. Narcissism is contagious. They get infected with the narcissism virus. And they increasingly come to resemble the narcissist more and more. And they lose their core identity. They lose who they used to be and who they were. And this process is called, in clinical terms, estrangement. They become estranged from themselves. They become alienated. And they feel, and so these kind of victims would say, I don't know what came over me, or that's not me. I've never done something like this before, or I don't know myself anymore. You know, these sentences are indicative of the third solution, the emulation and imitation and absorption of the narcissist. We are talking about literally taking over the mind. We have studies starting about 12 years ago. There's a mechanism, a process known as entrainment. Entrainment is when you're exposed to sounds which are repetitive, music, mantras, abuse, verbal abuse. It's usually repetitive. When you're exposed to such sounds, your brain synchronizes with the brain of the abuser or the musician, so both brains begin to emit exactly the same frequencies and exactly the same ways, and cannot be told apart using EEG, electroencephalography. So our brains synchronize physically. The waves become identical when we are exposed to the same sounds, which are structured, harmonious, and so on. So verbal abuse has this function, and the narcissist entrains your brain. And essentially, what the narcissist also does, he installs in your brain an application. It's like you're a smartphone, and the narcissist installs an app. This application is the narcissist's voice. It's what we call an introject. The narcissist's voice is in your head, inside your mind. And the narcissist introject, this voice of the narcissist, is looking for other voices in your mind, might collaborate with him. So, for example, if you had a mother, and this mother kept telling you, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're a failure, you're disappointing me, you're not a good son, or whatever, the narcissist would install an introject in your mind, and this introject will collaborate with your mother's introject. They will make a coalition. This process is known as clustering. They will make a cluster, and they will both now be telling you that you're ugly and stupid and failure and disappointing and so on. Both of them. They amplify each other. When the narcissist is gone from your life, you were discarded, or you abandoned the narcissist, or the narcissist has died, or whatever, the voice is still there. The introject is there, and it is 100% active. You have been infested. It's a parasite inside your mind. Everything I'm saying is based on neuroscience. This is not conspiracy theory or crazy things, you know? So it's there, and you need to be deprogrammed, as if you were a member of a cult. You know, when we take out members of cults, we try to deprogram them. They've been programmed. The neuroplasticity of the brain is sometimes your friend. The ability of the brain to rewire itself, to rearrange itself, to rearrange the furniture, if you wish. This is sometimes a friend when you recover from some life crisis. It's your friend. But it's sometimes an enemy. Because if someone leverages this neuroplasticity, they can rewrite and rewire your brain in a pernicious, insidious, nefarious way. They can render your brain your own enemy, your enemy. And you need help with this. You need to rewrite your brain and find yourself, because you're lost. There's no identity there. The narcissism is a very interesting phenomenon, because the narcissist applies to you all his deficiencies. So, for example, the narcissism, pathological narcissism, is a failure in separation individuation. It's when the individual has not been allowed to separate from the parental figures, and therefore they never became an individual. So the narcissist will not allow you to separate, will not allow you to be an individual. Narcissism, the narcissist, doesn't have a functioning self. Instead, there is an emptiness. It's clinical what I'm saying. There is an emptiness. Actually, emptiness is one of the diagnostic criteria of borderline personality disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So there is a void, there is a black hole there where a functioning self should have been. We call this process identity diffusion or identity disturbance. There's no identity, no core identity. So the narcissist takes away your identity. The narcissist introduces his own absence into you. It's a cloning process. The narcissist is trying to clone you in his image, because the narcissist is godlike. In his own mind, the narcissist is a god. And exactly like God created men in his own image, at least in the Bible, the narcissist tries to recreate you in his own image by cloning you, cloning in you his absence, cloning in you his lack of separation and externality, cloning in you his inability to tell external from internal, cloning in you his fantasy. He wants you to become him, an extension of him. That's why he converts you into an internal object, because as an internal object, he can manipulate you and control you and so on. When you are external, when you have personal autonomy, independence, friends, family, when you make choices and decisions, you're dangerous. You cannot be controlled. You cannot be manipulated. He needs to take all this away from you. He needs to isolate you. He needs to suppress you. He needs to deanimate you. He needs to kill you, metaphorically.
Yeah.
And this is the big difference between narcissistic abuse and all other forms of abuse. And that is why I coined the phrase narcissistic abuse in the 1980s, because it's not like all other forms of abuse. It's about killing you, literally, I mean, metaphorically.
Yes. Wow. Oh my goodness. So do they mellow down with age?
There is a debate about this, but the consensus is that they don't. There are some traits, for example, antisocial behavior tends to ameliorate with age, in psychopaths as well. Beyond the age of 45, most psychopaths are no longer psychopaths.
Okay, it's kind
Beyond the age of, because they no longer behave in antisocial criminal ways. They have learned their lessons. They have a family. They become more normal, more. Similarly, borderline personality disorder, 81% of people with borderline personality disorder can no longer be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder after age 35. So these disorders ameliorate and disappear with age. There is a remission, not a relapse. Narcissism, so the psychopathic elements in narcissism mellow with age. Narcissist becomes less defined, less reckless, less contumacious, more pro-social, more communal, and so on. So this, yes, this part, yes. The borderline elements in narcissism mellow with age, disappear with age. For example, emotional dysregulation.
Because they are also experiencing this hurt or whatever, this problem they are
We're
also
not sure
facing.
why. We're not sure why. We actually tend to believe that it has something to do with the brain, that it is neurobiology, not life experience. We believe that, but we don't know. We don't know.
Okay.
However, the core of narcissism, for example, the inability to experience empathy, the lack of access to positive emotions, the impaired reality testing, the negative affectivity, the constant experience of negative emotions such as hatred, envy, rage, and so on. All these remain intact unto death. They do not change through the lifespan. So the narcissist is still exploitative, still to some extent obnoxious and abrasive, lacks empathy, is unable to tell the difference between reality and fantasy, is grandiose, is entitled, demanding, and so on. So all these survive into death. And we cannot even modify them meaningfully in therapy. We can change behaviors. In therapy, we can alter or modify the narcissist's abrasive behaviors, for example, with success, I would say. But we cannot touch the core. We cannot change the core. It's there for life. And that's why I insist that the narcissist is his narcissism or her narcissism. Narcissism is the narcissist. Take away the narcissism and nothing is left. By the way, half of all narcissists are women. I'm using the male gender pronouns because that is good Victorian literary convention. And I'm into literature. I'm an author of fiction and I'm a poet. So I'm using these conventions. But half of all women nowadays, half of all narcissists, I'm sorry, are women.
What role does self-awareness play when we are dealing with this narcissistic in the society? Yeah, you mentioned some data, like 30 seconds of video and all these things. What are the steps we can take? I mean, detaching them or distancing them is one, but how we can put something in our head that, okay, this is something wrong, or I have to take this step more organically, more strongly.
Your intuition is a great guide. Intuition is wrong 50% of the time when it comes to the world, to reality, to events, to objects. But intuition is right minimum 75% of the time, usually closer to 90% of the time when it comes to other people. So you should trust your intuition completely. Intuition, for example, is a far better guide than psychological evaluation. So when you come across someone, you feel uncomfortable. You feel there are unanswered questions. And even if you're uncomfortable about a single thing they've done, you've been dating this person for 3 hours and they've done a single thing that you're uncomfortable about. Trust your instincts. Walk away. That's my first piece of advice. Second piece of advice. Maintain your principles and boundaries and do not compromise. Never mind how lonely you are. Never mind how sex-starved you are. Never mind how craving human company and companionship you are. Maintain your principles and boundaries and walk away the second someone attempts to breach them. So, if you, for example, if one of your principles is that you participate in the decision-making as to which restaurant to go to and which film to see, and your partner insists that he will decide which restaurant to go to or in which film to see, walk away. Do not compromise your principle. Don't say, it's okay, it's a minor issue. Why should I make a big deal about it, of it, I'm lonely, I haven't dated for months or years, and it's my first opportunity. I should compromise. It's, human interaction is about compromise and consensus. Do not. You have principles and boundaries that have developed and you developed for a good reason. Never give them up. The third piece of advice that I would give is monitor the speed and the alacrity of the interaction. Healthy people interact with you slowly, incrementally, gradually. If it's too fast, walk away. So the narcissist, for example, if you're on a date, the narcissist would offer to move in with you on a first date, offer to marry you on a second date, and you would be planning how many children to have with you on a third date. And that's a very slow narcissist. It's a slow narcissist. That is a strong indicator that something is very wrong. That's not how people interact. If a narcissist tells you you're his best friend after 2 meetings, if someone tells you you're his best friend after 2 meetings, it's a bad sign. That's not how friendships are made. If a narcissist tells you I love you after 3 meetings, it's a warning sign, it's a red alert. People don't love other people so fast and without a lot more knowledge, a lot more acquaintance, a lot more intimacy. Something is wrong. Monitor the speed. Speed is a major tell when it comes to narcissists. They move too fast because it's not real as far as they're concerned. It's a video game. It's an imitation. It's a fantasy. They don't perceive this as real. It has no consequences. Whatever they're saying has no consequences. So they make promises. One of the major signs of narcissism is fantastic promises, and if it's too good to be true, it's 100% of the times not true. Common sense, intuition. You don't need to read textbooks. You don't need to listen to this interview or to experts, or just follow your gut instinct and insist on who you are. Do not compromise your identity. Do not become someone else. Even minimally, even 0.1%, do not become someone else. I'm not talking about compromising. Of course, you could compromise, It's not a question of, but don't compromise who you are. Don't compromise your identity. Be you at all times. If anyone challenges this, wants you to be someone else, they're not dating you. They're not befriending you. They're not working with you. They're working with some image, some idealized version of you that has nothing to do with it. When I mention speed, it also applies to idealization. If the narcissist tells you that you're the greatest genius since Albert Einstein, don't fall for it. Don't feel flattered. Don't say wonderful. Don't get addicted to this. If he tells you that you're drop dead gorgeous, that you're amazingly beautiful, and you know that you're not, you're a bit on the plump side, don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. The speed and the unreality of it. Test reality all the time. All the time ask yourself, does this sound real? Could it be that I'm more of a genius than Albert Einstein? Probably not. So it's unreal. And it's fast. How do you know that I'm a genius? We've spent 20 minutes together, you know?
Mm.
Just common sense. Here's the principle. Bring your grandmother with you to all your dates and meetings and so on, and listen to what she has to say. Don't bring her physically. Sometimes she may be dead, yeah? But bring her voice with you. Your grandmother is wise. Your grandmother is old. She's seen everything. She's witnessed everything. She knows best. Forget psychologists and psychiatrists and textbooks and YouTubes. And take your grandmother with you. She will tell you. She will tell you, this guy is not real. This guy is fake. This guy is crazy. Lives in fantasy. This guy is insane. Or this guy wants your money, or just wants to have sex with you, or whatever. So take your grandma with you. That's my advice.
So we are on the last stage of it. And the last question, can people fully heal after this torture?
Yes. Yes. The prognosis is excellent. And if you do some self-work and then followed by therapy, the prognosis is almost 100% healing. Don't confuse healing with memory. You need to remember the trauma. You need to remember the torture. You need to. It's part of who you are. It's part of your history. And it's the only way to learn and grow. So we're not talking about erasing what had happened. We're not talking about, pretending it had never happened. No, that's not healing. That's denial. It's not healing. Healing means integrating your experiences, owning them, embracing them, acknowledging them, and benefiting from them. So on my channel, on my YouTube channel, there's a playlist. It's titled Narcissistic Abuse, Healing and Recovery. There are well over 200 videos there. It's free of charge. Just go there and start to watch the videos. Then look for a therapist whose expertise is toxic, abusive relationships, recovering from them, healing, and work with this kind of therapists. And your chances of emerging from this intact, fully functional, back to your old self, the chances are very close to 100%. You will always remember the bad times. You will always be in pain and hurting and so on, because this is life. Life is about loss. Loss is the great teacher, the only teacher. As we grow up, we constantly lose. We lose our childhood, we lose our adolescence, our youth, we lose our mother, we lose our father, we lose friends, we lose jobs, we lose. It's about losing. And we need to embrace these losses. They are our friends, And what the narcissist has been, whatever else the narcissist may have been, abuser, torturer, horrible person, and so on, he was a great teacher. The narcissist is a great teacher. He has taught you a lot about yourself, about life, about avoiding similar situations and similar people in the future. And he made you grow up. He catalyzed, the narcissist catalyzed the process of maturation. You became mature. You became wise. You acquired wisdom. Don't give all this up. It comes with a price tag. Of course it comes with a price tag. The pain, the bad memories, the hurt. But what in life does not come with a price tag? Everything has a cost.
Excellent, Professor. Thank you very much for your time. It's an honor and privilege to be you and to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.